All right, welcome to Empathy Month. Today we're talking to Dr. Garrett Weatherhead, and he is going to speak with us about disruptive empathy as the engine of anti-racism. I'm so excited to hear from Garrett, and I think this lens through which we're going to be talking about empathy is so desperately needed right now more than ever. But before we get into it, I want to talk a little bit about Garrett. He is a licensed psychologist who lives and works in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He earned his doctorate in counseling psychology from Western Michigan University, a program that prioritizes the needs of communities of color and other marginalized communities. He currently splits his time between private practice and anti-racism education. In all spaces, he strives to create genuine interactions within and across race, ethnicity for those engaging in anti-racism. Garrett, did I miss anything that you wanted to share?
No, and thank you for the welcome, Kendra. And I wouldn't say you missed anything. I would just say I would re-emphasize that a lot of the goal of the speaking that I do is to create genuine spaces across race so that we can have real conversations.
Wonderful. Well, let's hear a little bit more about disruptive empathy and anti-racism.
Okay, thank you. So as Kendra said, the title of this presentation is Disruptive Empathy as the Engine of Anti-Racism. I am just to name that I'm a white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied Christian male. Whenever I attend presentations where someone's talking about race or difference, those are things that I am interested in about the presenter. So I want to give them to you as we start the presentation. Before we dive in, I'd like to start with a simple equation. So if racism equals disconnection, then anti-racism equals connection. And this equation comes from lots of different interactions within and across race. And I want to name just a couple of those interactions now. One of these quotes is from a Black man, a friend, a colleague in my doctoral program. He said, "Being open with a white person about racism is like crawling across a room full of broken glass." The second quote, someone I consider a close friend, a Black man. He said, "There are parts of myself that I will never allow a white person to see." And again, because of interactions like this, with people saying things like that to me, I started to understand that race and racism, the way it sits with us, is a consistent and large source of disconnection. And what I've started to learn and hope is true is that if I am doing the work of anti-racism, if I am doing the work of learning about race and racism, learning how it affects me, learning how it affects the people that I love and care about, then I open the door for more connection. And I wanted to frame this equation in our conversation about disruptive empathy, because for me, disruptive empathy is the thing that is the process by which we get to connection across race. So I want to talk a lot more about that. Just a brief caveat or a brief information is the concept of disruptive empathy and the arc of empathy comes from Dr. Maureen Walker and from this book, When Getting Along Is Not Enough. It feels important to name that at the outset because this is her work, and I want her to have credit for it. I have taken some of the work and put my frame on it, and I'll try and be clear about when that's happening too. This is where we're going today. I'm first going to define disruptive empathy. I'm going to talk about the different parts of empathy, the ARC, awareness, respect, and compassion. And then I'm going to dive into a personal example of how, or of a time that I used the ARC of empathy to maintain and create connection across race. And then I'm going to end with 5 final thoughts. So let's dive in with a definition of disruptive empathy. Disruptive empathy is a willful destabilization of how we see others and ourselves. One concept of race and racism is that culture has given us scripts about how to interact across race. And these scripts are often unconscious, below consciousness, and also they have consequences. A brief example of this. This happened several years ago. I was walking down the street on the sidewalk. 2 Black men were walking on the same sidewalk coming towards me. I felt an urge to cross the street, and I crossed the street. And what that example is showing is that this urge was something subconscious telling me a story about the men in front of me. And that story was that potentially that they were dangerous, that I didn't want to be on the same sidewalk as them. And again, in the moment, that story was not conscious to me. And the story had consequences. I didn't get a chance to interact with the men to change the story. Right? So, and what disruptive empathy would say is that the job is to bring that story to our conscious level, identify the story, and then do the work of dismantling it, disrupting it, interrupting it. And if we do that, we can create more connection. Second part is guarded empathy versus disruptive empathy. I think we all generally have a decent idea about a general definition of empathy. It's a feeling with someone. It's a warmth. It's a coming alongside another person. And one of the things that I've learned in my work as a psychologist is that I can deliver this empathy in a guarded way. I can sit with someone as they're sharing something from their worst day, and I can feel that with them. I can experience it with them. I can be alongside them, and I can remain guarded and disconnected from their story. And what disruptive empathy is encouraging is that to take that guard away. What disruptive empathy is saying is instead of having that guard and delivering a warmth, is that I have become now open and vulnerable to be changed by the person in front of me. The third one is disruptive empathy is anchored in courage, not comfort. Again, the general idea that we have about empathy is that it's this warm and comfortable thing. And what the concept of disruptive empathy is saying is that if you are comfortable, you're likely not doing it right. If you are comfortable, you are likely not placing yourself at the edge of vulnerability. And it would say that's not going to get you anywhere. And then the last thing is disruptive empathy acts as a portal to good conflict. Again, in my role as a psychologist, I hear a lot of people say they are scared of conflict. They are conflict avoidant. They move away from conflict. But in my world, conflict, when done well, creates real positive change. And that's what disruptive empathy is encouraging. Engage with someone in a real way, have the conflict, create the change. I'm going to move from a general definition of disruptive empathy to the different parts of empathy. The first part of empathy is awareness. So awareness is a process signaling presence, commitment, and non-judgmental witness. It's the way I think about this is a lot of my frames are from a psychologist space. When I show up as a psychologist, I am showing up with a clear mind, hopefully a clear emotional space, and I am communicating that I am calm and ready to listen and hear. And that is part of the awareness part of empathy. Second part of awareness is I am both inwardly and outwardly focused, enabling clear apprehension of text, subtext, and context of an encounter. Let me break that down just a little bit. The text is the words that are being communicated between us. Just the words. What are they? What is someone saying to me? How am I responding? The subtext is how am I feeling about the words? How am I feeling in the room with the other person? Is the other person aggressive? Are they demure? Are they avoidant? What is the subtext going on in the room? And the last one is the context. And the way I'd say that is, what did I bring with me inside the room? As a white male, what does white maleness mean in the context of this interaction? Am I interacting with another white male? Am I interacting with a Black male? Am I interacting with a First Nations woman? And what are the contexts or overlays might be happening about those scripts that culture has given us? A couple more thoughts about awareness, or a couple ways to do this, put this into practice. Brief side note, in looking for a picture, I was intentionally trying to find a picture of a white male intently listening, and I really struggled and could not find one. Just an interesting aside. I'm wondering what that might be saying. First part of awareness, or first thing to think about, is to pause and breathe. Simply pausing and breathing, you are getting your body ready and calm to listen intently and be aware. I would say I would recommend to do that not only at the beginning of an interaction, but all the way through an interaction. Second, become curious about yourself. What are my emotions? What memories are coming up? As someone's talking to me about what they are saying, how am I feeling? What is that feeling telling me about myself? What is that feeling telling me about the person across from me? And then the last thing is become curious about the other person. What emotions might they be feeling? What do they want me to know? What are they trying to communicate to me? The next part of the arc of empathy is respect. Respect signals curiosity, a tell me more stance that facilitates a loosening of the armor we carry to help us feel safe in a racialized conflict. I want to kind of focus on feel safe in a racialized conflict. If you've had conversations across race about race and racism, likely you've been, regardless of your whether you're white or BIPOC, likely it's been painful. Likely you've been hurt. Likely you have big emotions or some emotions about how that conflict went down. And what respect is asking us to do is to name the armor that we have heading into these conversations and potentially put it on the side for a second, or potentially for the sake of this conversation, put it on the side. This makes me think of a conversation that I had over the past couple of years with university professors. University professors were telling me that there was lots of opportunities in their classroom to potentially lean into and have these conversations about race and racism, and yet they were terrified to have them because they didn't want to lose their job. They didn't want to say the wrong thing. They didn't want to step into something that they couldn't handle. And what I might argue is that that avoidance of the conversation is part of the armor that we carry into these interactions. Another piece of armor that we carry is the idea of trying to win the interaction. If I enter a conversation and I am wanting to win, I want to bring this person to my point of view. I want to move them from the unfeeling, treacherous person that they are to my good and right side, right? Am I trying to win? What Dr. Walker would say is trying to win is armor that we're entering with. If we're trying to win, then we are not actually open to what they are trying to tell us. The next part is, can I get past the first look? What's under their first words? And as an example of this, I might just give you a couple first words. One is Black Lives Matter. Blue Lives Matter. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-choice. The task is, can you listen to someone's first words, their first statement, and move past it to understand how they got there? That's the question. And that's the goal of the respect. And the concept is, do I respect this person enough instead of ditching this conversation for something else to move in to understand how they got there? The last part of the arc of empathy is compassion. And compassion is defined as the intentional acknowledgement of our shared humanity. Can I find something in the person across from me that that I resonate with, that I connect with, that I can grab a hold onto? I might disagree with someone about 99,000 things, but is there one thing that connects me to them? And this idea that if we can, it allows us to stay connected. It allows us to stay involved. Second part of this is, it's not a blanket acceptance of another's beliefs. It's not me saying, if I can find some shared humanity, it's not me saying I agree with or condone, but it is saying, I am allowing myself to open a gentle open space that makes room for another's becoming. What a nice thing to say. But in practice, it's being present with someone and allowing them to affect you. A couple questions to choose compassion. What aspects of shared humanity is this encounter revealing? When I'm talking to someone, again, how can I connect with something that I share with this person? The second one is, how did this person come to this worldview? What experiences have contributed to their emotions about this topic? I really think about some of the major racial topics that we've talked about, or not that we've talked about, but that have happened. One example that comes to mind is Colin Kaepernick kneeling at the during the national anthem for a football game. What I thought was missing in that conversation is, how did Colin Kaepernick get there? Why was he there? Why did he choose to kneel? Does that mean he didn't respect the flag, or did that mean he did respect it? How in the world would he put his career in jeopardy for this act? Why? How did he get there? What happened? And it's this curiosity that helps us choose compassion. Instead of condemning at first blush, we're asking why? How did they get there? So that is again, that is the three different parts of disruptive empathy: awareness, respect, and compassion. So the thing I want to do now is talk about a personal example and how this can play out, and how it did play out for me. Here we go. So I want to provide a little bit of background and then tell you about the conflict that happened. So I did my doctoral studies in counseling psychology with a focus on multiculturalism, and what that actually meant was, what it really was in our program was a focus on race and power. And what that meant, how that played out was, in every single course, in nearly every single class period, I wrestled with my cohort, with my people, about race and racism, and how it was playing out both in our text about psychology and the concepts of psychology that we were learning, and how it was playing out between us in the classroom. And that was a daily wrestling in that program. And it was hard, but I found myself to be a better person from it. This picture that you're seeing, that is an actual picture of members of my cohort. If you notice, it is an intentionally multiracial, put together group. The people who created the program, they wanted us to do this wrestling. They thought we'd be better for it. After our graduation, after leaving this wrestling bubble, I began stepping into my own anti-racism identity professionally. I was already doing it personally, but then I started to do it in a more professional way. This led me to create a multicultural committee at my private practice, in which we started to look at the systemic parts of how our practice might be either systemically welcoming or not welcoming certain groups. It also had me building connections in the community, and with this identity in mind, right? I was meeting people and shaking hands and saying, "Hey, I'm an anti-racist psychologist. Can we talk about that? Let's have that conversation." I was leaning into that identity. It's in this time period that I made a post about the Charlottesville Charlottesville, Virginia white supremacist rally. If you remember, this happened in 2017 in Charlottesville, Virginia, in which white supremacist groups connected, got together and protested the removal of Confederate statues, right? And in the protesting, there was a conflict that was created, and many people were hurt, and one person died, right? So in response to that, I shared on social media my shock and my doubt about what to do with the emotions that I was feeling. My hope was that I was starting a genuine conversation on social media that we could have about the racial components of what was happening. And the initial responses to that post were good. Like there was some conversation starting. There was some people saying, yeah, I'm feeling angry and shocked too. Yes, some of the people that I was meeting in my area that I'd befriended across this anti-racism space were saying, yes, thank you for sharing this, Garrett. Wonderful. And then I received a response from John. John's not his real name, and John was a colleague of mine from this wrestling place. He was a doctor colleague of mine, and he was a Black man from this place. I knew John well. John knew me well. John and I shared the same experiences, and like me, John had graduated and moved into his professional career. And I wish I had the text of the original post, but what John said is, you missed it, Garrett. I can't believe you are describing your emotions and a doubt about what to do. You should know what to do. You should know how to move forward, because we were taught, right? And what I experienced this, and then other people said on the post, they said, yeah, John, you're right. Garrett missed it here, right? And what I want to describe to you is when, I checked the post right before going home from work one evening, and I was so embarrassed. I remember feeling hot. I remember starting to sweat. And I remember feeling so angry at John. I remember feeling like, how could he? How could you? How could you blow me up like this? So publicly? Couldn't you have sent me a message? Couldn't you have given me a call? Why did you do it this way? And that's the background of what happened. So what I want to tell you is I want to name how I used the arc and then tell you how it resulted, right? So the first thing I did was I paused and breathed. I paused and breathed. I did a lot of pausing and breathing. And through that, I formed a plan to build awareness about why my reactions were so big. And the plan included talking to my wife. My wife is a very validating person, had become a very validating person in my life. So I wanted to talk to her to kind of get validation, get validation for the feelings that I had. Second thing is, I talked to another colleague of John and I's, a white woman, who could help me kind of ground and get perspective, help me find my own perspective, and help me find what John's perspective might have been. And then the last thing I did was I journaled. Journaling is a way that I build awareness about myself, and build awareness about how I'm feeling and thinking. So after doing all those things, I began to, again, the next part of the awareness is, what am I feeling? What is this interaction making me feel or prompting me to feel? And I'll name them. First thing I felt was outrage. Didn't my history with B or John provide space for a different response? Didn't all that history with us going to school together, didn't I earn enough respect for him to give me a call instead of rebuking me publicly? I felt humiliated. I felt like John was in some way being paternalistic. The quote that I carried around and that I wrote in my journal is, someday you'll figure this racism stuff out, little buddy. Like that kind of tone and that kind of feeling, right? Like someday you'll figure this out, Garrett. It'll be okay, but you're not there yet. I felt shame. I felt foolish about my attempt to engage publicly as a white person. Why would I do that? What was I thinking? How foolish I must look. And then the last thing, I felt defeated. Why would white people put themselves in a position to be rebuked like this? Why even engage like this? What is the point here? What am I doing? And then lastly, I started to wonder about what John's emotions were and what were his motivations. I started the process of thinking, what could John be trying to tell me, actually? Second is respect. One of the questions I asked with respect to respect is, what was the goal for the conversation with John? Was I trying to win? And my honest response was, yeah, I think I was. My initial goal upon entering the conversation was to hear an apology from John. I wanted him to hear what I had to say and for me to convince him that he was wrong. That is the way I was trying to win. Once I was able to understand that, I was able to put that on the side, but that was present first. And then the second thing is, could I get past his first words? And honestly, I think I could. I was increasingly curious about what prompted him to comment on my post. Why didn't he just ignore it? Why didn't he just say, Garrett's wrong, and ignore the post? What prompted him to comment and lean into the conversation? I was curious. And then could I find some, with respect to compassion, could I find some shared humanity between myself and John? And there's a couple of things that I was able to note. One, John, like me, was an early career psychologist attempting to embrace his anti-racism credibility. He was doing the same process that I was doing in a different place, in a different place in the country, in a different world. And that was something that we shared, and I could grab onto that and know that that was part of something that we might share, right? I couldn't know that, but it's something that I could identify for myself. And then the other thing that I hypothesize is that John may have felt a pull to protect the reputation of our doctoral program, right? Like, I could imagine that if John saw something that his colleague wrote and he disagreed with it so in such a big way, it might be important for him to say is that, no, that's wrong, and correct that in a public way, so as to protect like the honor, the reputation of who we were as a program. I could see that, and I could grab hold of that. So here's what happened. Here's how it played out. after kind of creating a base for myself before contacting John, I did reach out to John. And I was able to talk to him via phone and talk to him via messages over the course of about a week, right? We had a long phone conversation, and then we corresponded via message after that. And one of the things that happened was my friendship with John continued. Before entering the program, before thinking about this with respect to empathy, I don't think that I would have continued a relationship with John. John was in a different part of the world, country. He had moved away. We weren't talking very much. I probably just would have said, I'm good. We're done. But because we were able to go through this process together, my friendship continued. And not only continued, we revisited the same conversation several years later, with new insights, with, oh, we've grown. Let's look back at this. Let's break this down again. It was super interesting. So it gave us another chance to connect again. Second thing, I realized that I was susceptible to white fragility, classically so. Before I built awareness around the situation, around this conflict, I thought that I had arrived at a certain place in my anti-racism journey. I didn't think that I was the white fragile person. I didn't think that, I thought that I had gone through enough battles to interact appropriately in these conversations across race. But what I found out was that no, in fact, I am still susceptible to white fragility, and that would be something that I need to watch out for. The third thing is that my fragility was linked to my belief that I had done enough to earn allyship. I thought that I had arrived. What I was learning is that I had built some part of my identity, some part of my worth around me being an anti-racist. And then, and when that was threatened, that it did something to the way I valued myself and the way I felt worth. And that was an important thing. And it led to the last bit of awareness. It prompted a years-long exploration of my anti-racism why. What I started to understand was those first attempts at anti-racism, I was engaging as trying to be the good white person. I wanted people to know that I was an anti-racist, and I wanted people to know that I was a good person talking, thinking, and doing anti-racism. And this conflict with John prompted me to really examine that good white person place, and to understand that it was not sustainable in the long run. A couple more bits of awareness from John. John's feedback prompted even more introspection. This is the feedback that I got from John in those conversations. When asked why he decided to interact with me in a public way, in a direct and public way, it's not because in his mind he was honoring our history. In his mind, he was saying, I know Garrett. I know Garrett can handle this critique. And I know that because he can handle this critique, we can have a conversation about this together, maybe for the benefit of this public space. Ha! Second, he expressed concern that my expression of doubt on the post may relieve the healthy tension of others. So what he was saying was, what he pointed out was, you, Garrett, a person who has been given and granted the opportunity for education, this brilliant education in anti-racism, you, Garrett, expressing doubt relieves tension, potentially relieves tension that other white people might feel. And instead of either helping them understand what to do with that tension or helping maintain the tension, you miss this opportunity. Second, the third one, he believed the post, I'm kind of referring to this, believed the post was a missed opportunity to pass along information to others, right? Instead of me saying, okay, this is another racially charged conflict that has occurred in our country. What can we do with this? Where do we go with this? And by me simply expressing my grief and doubt, he was saying, yeah, emotions are okay, but what are you going to do with them? And that's the last thing too. He communicated to me that BIPOC people are tired of hearing about feelings when they are not coupled with actions. And that last one is something that I continue to think about constantly. Yes, I can have my feelings about these racist incidents. I do have feelings. They are big. They are important. And yet, if those feelings are not coupled with actual action for change, it's not really doing it. A couple final thoughts. Disruptive empathy is a skill to be developed over time. There are a lot of different parts: awareness, respect, and compassion. There's a lot of different things to put into play, to think about. You're not going to be perfect at it right away, but it is a skill. If you start and continue to work on it, it can be developed and grown over time. Self-awareness and emotional intelligence are vital components to disruptive empathy. You have to do the work to be aware of what's going on in your body. You have to do the work to be aware of what emotions are informing this interaction. And that work for me, it comes from therapy, me receiving therapy from another, from assistance and help and support from friends and family, and journaling, right? Like, those are the ways I build self-awareness and emotional intelligence. Third, maintain a presence practice, such as meditation, mindfulness, or contemplative prayer. What a presence practice does, it allows you to practice being present. And if you are able to do that daily, you are able to enter spaces more intentionally, having practiced presence. Number 4, understanding systemic racism boosts disruptive empathy. With an understanding of all of what might be disrupting relationships systemically, with that awareness, by reading books, by attending conferences, presentations, by increasing your awareness of systemic racism, you are better armed to enter individual spaces and improve the relationships across race. And then last, I would say those in power have a responsibility to listen more at the beginning. Yes, they have a responsibility to engage and engage authentically and genuinely and vulnerably. But I believe that if you have power, whether it be power as a white person, or you are in a powerful position, such as a therapist or a supervisor, then you have a responsibility to listen more first and then participate. And I will end the presentation with this quote: "Liberation loves company." I love this quote. I love this author. If you do the work to disrupt the roles and create empathy, you're doing the work of liberating yourself from the roles we play around racism. and Liberation Loves Company. We'll stop there.
Garrett, thank you so much for all of what you shared. I just want to make a couple comments in response. One, right at the beginning, I love the way that you talked about connection and disconnection. You did it in a way that you did it through, explain your own lived experiences and the lived experiences of other people, right? And I also appreciated the way that you gave us resources throughout your session so that we can revisit some of the concept and deepen our understanding on our own, like, Dr. Walker's. And I think one of the other wonderful things was how much you used your own experience to explain and apply the concept that you were talking about. I think we can easily get stuck in our heads around these things. And it's why, the work of becoming aware can feel like a head game instead of a lived reality, and a heart, and coming from the heart. I think also there were some questions that bubbled up, if you wouldn't mind, answering some of those. One of the things when you were talking about disruptive empathy, you were talking about being open and vulnerable to the person in front of you, as opposed to the guarded empathy. I loved that kind of contrast that you were drawing there. And, I imagined, we all have these like pictures of who our therapists are, right? They're the comfy people sitting on the side, passively, objectively, filtering this information, right? And that we're sharing with them. And then I started thinking about other scenarios where, some people are in their own moment of reactivity. And there might be moments where it feels like not safe to connect to that, even if you're seeing their suffering, right? Do you have thoughts on that? Like, because I don't know if you were describing a specific type of interaction where you're the white person doing the learning, right?
Yeah.
Or if this is out in the world, living your life, and you're challenging your own beliefs, right? And something's unfolding in front of you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your question is bringing up one of the things that Dr. Walker has said, or one of the recommendations that she has given, and it's to set the parameters of good conflict, and set the parameters around good conflict so that you are able to have good conflict. So if you are entering a space where you yourself are overwhelmed, or past your emotional capacity, or you acknowledge and understand that the person in front of you is overwhelmed or past their emotional capacity, to set the parameters in such a way that you can come back and have a productive conversation, right? So maybe it's owning, for me, I would say something like, I'm going to own my own being overwhelmed right now. And if we could, can I come back tomorrow, or can we revisit this tomorrow when I can feel more calm?
Mm.
So in that way, I'm setting the parameter for us to be able to have a good and productive conflict, a good and productive conversation.
I really, your response anticipated my next question, which was around a lot of times, like, as white people who are coming to learn of the deep suffering of, people of color, you can get caught up in your own feelings of like sadness, anger,
Ooh.
you know, self-resentment, or etc. And then it shifts to becoming about you and tending to
Yes,
your right. Like, so I feel like what you, in your response, you helped carve out a space for you to handle that with your support network and resources so that you can show up and be able to take in what's unfolding for someone.
absolutely. That reminds me of there's an experience where two women host a dinner with white women, and there's a documentary about it. I can't remember the name of it, but in the documentary, they're sitting at dinner with the white women, and one of the rules is that there's no crying at the table, and 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 what the goal of that is that as you're learning about these painful things that are coming up about race and racism, that your emotion as a white person is not centered. Yes, it's okay to have emotion, but do it over there. Understand yourself. Do the work of self-awareness. Do the work of understanding why you're crying, and then come back and be present.
Yes. And you know, this is a tension that I think is sometimes hard to tend to because, you know, I think in our culture, we're not taught to take care of ourselves, right? We're taught to tamp down so that we don't affect others. But that's a different approach than like being invited into really taking care of yourself. And so one of my other questions that popped up was like, how do you in your mind or heart put together like how you approach this from the standpoint of like, if I'm going to use my resources for self-awareness to help develop the capacity, right, to be present, I'm not taking action, right? Like, and then this is a compound question, so I apologize in advance, but like, so then, okay, but if I did take action, it could be the wrong action and I could do more harm than good, right?
Totally.
Like, so, but how, but you can easily get stuck in the brain, like trying to be good enough, right? Like,
Well, I in for me, I think you're naming and talking about separate processes, right? You're talking about the process of doing the self-awareness work, the introspection work, the emotional work, the emotional intelligence work. And then you're naming the process of, okay, now once that work is done, it's never done, by the way. When that work is at found some place to move forward, then how do you act? How do you move? How do you engage? Right? Both of those are separate processes. And for me, um, one of my challenges is to spend way more time in the processing, way more time in the introspection, way more time in the, oh, well, I'm doing the work of anti-racism over here with my books and my journal.
mhm.
Because the action is scary and 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 vulnerable, and I don't know if I'm going to do it right. In fact, I know that I'm probably going to do it wrong. Um, so yeah, so I found myself spending much more time in the away, the introspection, and not as much time in the doing. And I've been called out for that.
Hmm.
I've been given feedback by close friends of color who've said, "Where are you?"
Mm.
And must be nice to have an anti-racism journey while we are suffering the cost of racism.
Must be nice to have a choice to dip into it or dip out of it.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Mm. Whew. What was your response to that?
Well, my response was informed by this interaction with John.
Mm.
My response was, thank you. Thank you for leaning into our friendship enough to give me feedback.
Whoa, yes, to care enough. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for caring enough about me to tell me that I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. Did it change your behavior?
It prompted me to face my insecurities faster.
Yeah.
And to choose the fear and insecurity rather than comfort of my journal.
Nice. One of the other things you talked about was armor. The armor that we put on, or the armor that's there and we didn't realize we put it on, right? And I was reflecting on how, especially with your example about John, that I wonder if at some point for you, that being viewed as an anti-racist was a certain type of armor of its own.
Ooh, such a good question. Sorry. It's such a good question. And I've not thought about it, but absolutely, that's true. How could it not be true? Right? Because I would say it as because I've arrived
Right.
as an ally, therefore, I don't have to do as much vulnerability work. And I can just kind of cruise along being the good white guy. Absolutely, that's true. Absolutely, that was a form of armor. Such a good question.
Another question about armor, and that is, you talked earlier in the session about how, and I'm going to put it in my own words. So again, if this is not resonating, please let me know. We've all, both, white people and people of color, been socialized, like from the moment that we are born, from where we're born to how people interact with us, to come to believe certain things about ourselves, assumptions, if you will, and reinforced by a lot of social media, a lot of other ways we interact with the world. So much so that it can insulate us, right, from getting at what's already there, right, that we don't even think to question.
Ooh.
Right. So it does become ultimately a part of our facade. So how do we get underneath that? Like to even develop the awareness of it?
I don't know, but I will tell you how the most effective way for me has been real, genuine relationships with someone that's not white. It's real, genuine relationships. It's a friend. It's a friend telling me, Garrett, your whiteness is making me not want to talk to you. You're not because I'm white, but because I'm saying something that's communicating that I have more power or that I am better than.
Mm.
Garrett, I cannot believe you said that. I need to take a break. Having the cost of my internalized white supremacy to be right in my face, that has been the most consistent prompter for me to understand what needs to be unwound, disentangled.
Mm. Oh, Garrett, you have given me, and I'm sure you will give others, so much to think about. And I just appreciate, the work that you're doing, that you will probably always be doing. It's on some level in your life, and the work that you're encouraging and prompting in others to do as well. It's critical. It's critical work. So, thank you for being part of this session. And for those of you who watch this and want to connect, is there a good way for them to connect with you, or if they want to ask you more questions or get engaged in other ways?
One of the things that I would encourage people to do is to find me on LinkedIn and connect with me in that way. Maybe there's a connection point through Empathy Month and on the website. That would be the best and easiest way to connect with me, and I'd love to connect in that way if someone has more thoughts or questions or wants to interact.
Fantastic. All right, well, this will conclude our session today, and we are going to look forward to seeing you next week. And this is interesting. I'll be doing the next session on empathy and restorative justice, and the things that Garrett spoke about, we're going to be building on, actually. And so a little bit more into how do we, build the capacity to deal with shame and other barriers that get in the way of real, authentic connection. So look forward to continuing this conversation.